Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be in the United Kingdom on the 23rd and 24th of July at the invitation of British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. This marks the Prime Minister's fourth visit to the country and one that comes at a pivotal moment in India-UK ties. According to the Ministry of External Affairs, the two leaders will engage in wide-ranging discussions covering the full spectrum of the bilateral relationship, from trade and investment to defense, technology, climate action and people-to-people ties. Besides, they're also expected to exchange views on key regional and global developments. Prime Minister Modi is also likely to call on King Charles III during this visit. But at the heart of this high-level engagement is the expected signing of the India-UK Free Trade Agreement, negotiations for which were concluded earlier this year in May. So what does this much-anticipated FTA entail? What are the gains and give and take for both countries? And how will this visit shape the next chapter of our partnership with the UK? We'll discuss some of these aspects and more on the show today. Joining me are two distinguished guests. So let me begin by introducing them to you. I'm delighted to welcome on the program today former Ambassador Jitendra Tripathi. Ambassador, thank you for joining us on the program. Welcome to Sansad TV. It also gives me immense pleasure to welcome on this edition of Perspective Professor Gulshan Sachdeva. He is a Professor, Center for European Studies, School of International Studies, JNU. Professor, always a delight to welcome you on the program today. Ambassador, before we begin the program today and before we hear your views on the much anticipated free trade agreement, give us a broader context for a better understanding about the India-UK relations, and particularly how do you see that arc of our relationship having transformed, especially in the last 2 decades. So especially if you could give us an idea of some important or significant milestones that have brought us to where we are in terms of our bilateral ties with the UK.
You see, when India got independence from UK, the relations are not very much cordial because of the experience, because of migration, because of the killing, because of the partition.
Right.
And after that, because of the Cold War, Britain was its a very active member. So the relations more or less were sort of stale relations till 90s. Rather, I will say till the beginning of this century, because in the beginning of the century, the change started to materialize. When 2004 we signed a strategic partnership with UK. Then after that, a series of agreements were signed. Like in 2005, we signed economic and the establishment of Economic and Trade Council, Defense and Security Partnership in 2015. 2010 was Civil Nuclear Cooperation Declaration. 2015 was again Nuclear Collaboration Treaty. So all this displayed a regular, steady development of relationship between the two countries. And now it is almost culminating in FTA. I am surprised that since we had colonial relationship for more than 200 years, many of Indians are living there, and at present about 1.5 million people of Indian origin. Why our bilateral trade would not take off? I mean, even now our bilateral trade is just $14 billion between the two countries.
Right. And how will the FTA change that is something that we will discuss in due course of the program. But since we are trying to understand how the relationship with the UK has evolved, let me also get in Professor Sachdeva's perspective. Professor, I was going through an article this morning. You've explained the different phases of our relationship with the United Kingdom, but especially since Brexit, what we see is New Delhi and London have been trying their best to strengthen these ties further. 2021 was when both sides upgraded relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership. Then you've mentioned the roadmap 2030. You also highlight the 2023 event wherein both countries established the 2+2 foreign and defense dialogue. And then last year, when there was this technology security initiative. The question that I want to ask you is, through these mechanisms, how have in the last few years we been able to achieve significant outcomes? And this can be both in terms of economic as well as strategic outcomes, which have brought us to today, where we are now on the verge of announcing the FTA.
Well, thank you, Tina. I mean, I think this is what exactly has happened between India and the UK, particularly, as you mentioned, since Brexit, because both the countries are trying to strengthen their relations during this phase. Because even the FTA, we were negotiating with UK when they were part of the European Union since 2007. But then we started again from 2022. It means within 3 years, we have been able to conclude this agreement. And Britain was also looking, after coming out from the European Union, they were also looking very new partners. And when they thought during this period, India could be very, very important partner for them. Because one is that we have very strong, relationship historical. There is also legacy. There are also legacy issues, positive and negative. But, there is a solid, base for our relationship. We had, as Ambassador mentioned, we signed the strategic partnership in 2004, and then in 2010 it was upgraded further. But in 2021, when Prime Minister Boris Johnson came here, this became comprehensive partnership. And then we had this roadmap 2030, which you mentioned. And then since then, again, many series of other things. I mean, particularly the security, technology security initiative. So many of those areas which are really critical for both the countries, and particularly for India's modernization, looking for artificial intelligence, quantum, semiconductors, health, technologies, and many other issues. So all those issues are there. But of course, I mean, as during the visit, you would see the highlight of this visit is going to be FTA. And this FTA, in fact, if you look at if you look at the Government of India figure, this is something around 23 billion trade we have only in goods. But if you look at goods and services is a very important part of India-UK relationship. This particular partnership and trade, we have already about close to 60 billion if you put all these things together. And I think there are the studies which have been done in both the countries, and policymakers from both the countries are quite confident that now with this agreement, we will have something around maybe double of this trade in the next 5 years or so. Why? Because like 99% of Indian goods are going to be now tariff-free. They can enter, and particularly many of those sectors which have certain comparative advantage now, which you have textiles, you have sports goods, you have gems and jewelry, you have many other items which perhaps will be able to now easily compete with other products. Similar thing would also happen from the British goods as well. You look at, in the food sector, the major products, what they have is like, Scotch whiskey here, where you have now 150% tariffs. Right. It's going to be 75%, and in few years, it could become even 40% or so. So they are also looking for new markets. It's expanding market. Similar thing is also happening in the services, because both these economies are really very strong in services, particularly IT and ITS related services. So there are a lot of opportunities. I think the businesses are looking through this market, this particular trade agreement. And in the last few years, since, after Brexit, UK was also looking for new trade agreements, which they have done. With Australia, with New Zealand, they have also signed agreement with the CPTPP. The same thing is also happening in India, because of many years we were very cautious. Between 2012-13 till 2021, we did not really sign any major trade agreement. Right. Now we have signed with Australia, with UAE, also with EFTA countries. And this is going to be really a major game changer, I must say, because this is one major market where there are competition, and some of the sectors will really have to face competition, particularly in the auto sector, in many other sectors. And the kind of, I would say, the concessions which we have given, we are also negotiating two other agreements, particularly with
Absolutely,
the.
Ambassador. Professor, we'll try and discuss these challenging areas as well. But let me get in a perspective on first the benefits of how both sides are set to look at the FTA, and as they announce it. Ambassador, I'll come back to you, and beyond the trade numbers, because Professor has already described in detail about some of these areas which will gain tremendously on both sides, the kind of concessions that both sides have agreed to give. But beyond the trade numbers, how do you look at the diplomatic weight of the FTA? Does it mean that post-Brexit, we are now entering a new phase of trust, more alignment with UK, with whom we've had a relationship of legacy, perhaps a lot of emotional baggage as well, but now we've moved beyond that to more of an economic engagement with this country?
Yes, you see, trade between any two countries, first requirement for this is a sense of trust, a comfort level. If two companies or two countries are, they trust each other or they are comfortable with each other, only then the trade happens and develops. So signing of FTA means that we have got a comfort zone, we have got a level at which we can be comfortable with each other.
Right.
And when we are comfortable with each other, then comes the next step, that is political or diplomatic proximity or friendship. So, with this, what happens, we will see, I can visualize, we can see eye to eye on many matters, climate, anti-terrorism, for us especially the Sikh separatism there in the UK, and then the Indian students, not only diaspora but Indian students, more facilities, labor laws, social security for Indian workers. So there are a lot of things that we can, and we see eye to eye when it comes to India's candidature in UNSC. And we also have similar views on many things, like climate change, like sustainable development, which we now have to synergize in order to have more tangible and better results. So I think future is bright. From here we take off another level, and the result will be seen very soon. I think in 2-3 years, maybe we'll be able to see what changes have been brought in.
Absolutely. Lots of areas in which work is required. But Professor, since you mentioned some of the areas which are set to stand as immediate beneficiaries, you spoke about the automotive tariffs, perhaps, which will be cut from over 100% to 10% under a tariff rate quota system. And this is where you've indicated a concern for us in terms of a challenge to the Indian automobile sector. If you could explain to us how big a concern that is, and how are we ensuring that perhaps that kind of a tariff cut does not impact our own indigenous drive, our own Make in India drive, which has picked up in recent years, but due to these kind of concessions that we make in negotiating trade deals, that should not be seen as a setback.
No, I mean, I'll just come back to this point in a minute, but the point you asked earlier, countries sign trade agreements with any other country. There is also strategic convergence on many issues. It's not just only purely economic matter. In the last few years, what we have seen, particularly if you look at the British foreign policy, they, once they announced their tilt towards the Indo-Pacific. And, what we have found after that, with the rise of assertive China, there is a convergence of many of those foreign policies to issues. And in fact, all kind of trade agreements, particularly now what is happening in the last, since President Trump has come to power, these are all strategic convergence which is taking place rather than actually just purely numbers. Now, the point you have asked about the automobile sector, no, this is a interesting, I would say, agreement to watch. That's what I'm saying. This is going to be a really game changer as far as trade agreements are concerned. because it's not just only about few goods which we are talking about. Tariffs would be down. Actually, that will benefit both the country. Now, both the countries are also doing quite extensive trade in services, and British services are also pretty competitive. So, this could also, depending on what kind of final text comes out, we'll see which are the services, which are the sectors we have opened up, where ours, whether it's which particular sectors are going to be really opened up for us as well as for them. One has to see the fine print of that particular trade agreement. But in the automobile sector, this is interesting because in one way, we are trying to strengthen our Make in India program. So now, and many of the other investors, particularly from Japan, from Korea, they have invested in India for the last many decades. They are also producing in India. So now, some of the, if only with 10% tariff, it's many of the companies which are actually producing, even Chinese companies and others, they might actually start sending their products to India. 10% is
Right.
really very huge
Okay.
tariff,
Yes.
and that's why, in fact, there is already a safeguard. There is already a quota, so it's not going to be open. So once that quota is filled, after that, of course, it will be stopped. So this is interesting in a sense, opening up for the British, car makers, whosoever is making, whether British companies or other companies, those who have invested in UK. But the similar kind of thing, is also, since we are also negotiating, with the United States, we are also negotiating with the European Union. So once they see that we have opened this market for UK, so they also perhaps would like to see similar kind of openings from there as well.
Right.
As and many other things also, about the development sector and others which have been part of, which are going to be part of this agreement. So it means that also shows that Indian policymakers and Indian industry, they feel perhaps more confident now that they can compete. And so they also see a lot of opportunity that we might open up one, or, in the overall picture, if we might open up one sectors, we might see benefits in other sectors as well. So I think the overall final text one has to study very carefully. But I think this is going to be really, I think, a new kind of agreement compared to many other agreements which we have done so far.
Ambassador, taking on from what the professor highlighted about how concessions in tariffs may also prompt other countries with whom India is currently negotiating a trade deal. It's in advanced stages. For example, the United States, also the European Union. What happens if they also start asking for similar negotiations? How will we ensure that we are able to get a fair deal which does not hamper our own Make in India initiatives? How do we diplomatically then, negotiate with different countries in different manners?
Well, you see, US has already started asking for concession in terms of threats or threats about raising the tariff rates, etc. But I think when it comes to the table, we will be able to convince, we should be able to convince them that in case they do not cede to our request, in case they insist on having less and less tariff for their goods to enter in the market, then they should also be prepared to act vice versa. Otherwise, when it is only take and take relationship, it is not a give and take relationship, then things won't survive. Yes, European Union things will be different, I suppose. With European Union, it will be much easier for us to negotiate a trade deal, while with USA, with Trump on its helm, it will be difficult. But not only the trade deal. What we should do is, trade is one part of the diplomatic relation. Other parts are defense relations. Then technical know-how, climate change, other areas, anti-terrorism, security, SDG. There are so many areas where they might require to cede, or they might require to accept our view. So
I think that's an interesting view, and let me also bring in Professor for a quick response to this. How do you see, Professor, this agreement also feeding into broader cooperation in areas that Ambassador just highlighted, say areas like digital trade, critical technologies, defense, also to include climate finance that the Ambassador spoke about?
Well, I mean, we, as you mentioned, we have a comprehensive partnership, and the large number of very huge institutional network is already there. Different kind of working groups, different kind of dialogues we are already having, and all these areas have already been covered in different ways. Even UK is also a very important development partner. We used to get quite significant development assistance from UK till very recently, but now, of course, we may not need perhaps that development assistance from UK, and they have identified other countries where they are channelizing their ODA. But we have been working together with them in the Triangular Development Cooperation projects. It means both India and the UK, they are actually implementing certain development projects in third countries. We have done it in Africa. We are also doing perhaps in the Indo-Pacific now, which has been in principle, this has been agreed. And in many other areas, in so many critical areas, you look at in the health sector, you look into the education sector, look into renewables. I think there are plenty of things which are already happening. So as I was mentioning that, once you have trade agreement, this gives you a new momentum to this relationship. That's what is very important. And that can also, there is also a lot of ambition to also work with the British companies, particularly in the defense sector, because in some of the sectors they are pretty good. And a lot of declaration has been made in the last couple of, years. But still, I think the progress is less. Right. So once there is a more confidence, once the companies have more linkages with each other, and I think we can also get them to our own defense modernization, our own defense industry here, where we can also start exporting. So there we need technology transfer, where we need kind of joint production, not just buying certain defense products from UK or others. So I think those are the areas in which we are moving, and already joint exercising and all the things are already happening in those areas. So there is a broader convergence, and technology security initiative was very clearly it's not just only about trade. There also has to be certain strategic convergence and trust, and that's why it has to be. This is being coordinated by the national security advisors from both the countries. It's not just only trade matters, and so we are looking into all these areas. And I think once we have this trade agreement, this gives you confidence. This gives you many companies. They'll start looking back, and already there's a lot of investment which has taken place from UK. And it's not one way. In more than 20 billion investment to Indian companies, about 1,000 companies are already there in the UK, those who are working in UK. And so it means there is and in fact, if you look at the numbers of all the financial and technical collaborations of Indian companies, a very significant proportion of those technical and financial collaborations are with British companies. And so earlier, in fact, Britain used to be kind of gateway for us to enter into the European market. After Brexit, things have changed. Our companies have adjusted well to all those changes, but still they are very much part of Europe. They still have an agreement with Europe. So all the linkages with the broader markets are still there. And but of course, one has to, as far as the trade matters, tariff, non-tariff things are concerned, one has to be careful. That's why still, I think even till the last minute negotiations are on. But even in the some sectors, others of course may ask, if you are giving certain concessions to UK, European Union will ask, others will ask. But once you are actually given it, it means you are confident that your sector is able to compete. And already there are certain safeguards built into this. The same kind of thing would also happen perhaps with others as well. Once we did, in fact, like even in the like in the wine and other sectors, once we had an agreement with Australia, some kind of arrangement was made that only the expensive wines can enter into Indian market. Otherwise, the lower products which our companies are producing, they should not be compete with others. So I think there are that's what all the negotiations are. But overall, it shows that we have actually these negotiations with highly developed, highly industrialized country, when we are going to have trade agreements, these are going to be of a different kind, and there are going to be challenges. As we have seen earlier with the India-ASEAN, Once we opened up, in certain areas we were able to benefit, in certain areas we felt even they opened up their markets, our companies were not really able to take advantage. That's why we are renegotiating some of those things. This is part of the game when you do the trade.
Certainly, and especially when we see that these trade negotiations take years, in this case perhaps more than 3 years. We are confident that the negotiators have agreed or given out concessions which make it a fair deal, especially in context of India and Indian markets. Ambassador, while we understand that the FTA will be perhaps the centerpiece of this visit of the Prime Minister, as Professor said, it will also add or accelerate momentum in how we take our relationship to the next level. So in that context, if I may ask you, what do you think will be perhaps the next big agenda item for India and the UK after the FTA to take this partnership to the next level?
Well, I think it will be defense and security. It will be anti-terrorism. It will be health, because India and UK had been collaborating on health, AstraZeneca and during the COVID time. Now India has emerged as the world's pharmacy. So maybe some more investment from UK to India, into India in pharmaceutical sectors. There may be then there may be technology transfer, innovation, critical technologies. These are the things that probably will get momentum once the FTA is signed. Probably within FTA or even outside the gambit of FTA, it will be easier for us to discuss and negotiate with our UK interlocutor.
Absolutely. One last word from Professor as well, taking this question further in terms of how this visit will add a new chapter to the India-UK relations. But also, do you believe that the FTA, which is very, very significant for both countries, it's been hailed by Prime Ministers of both countries, do you see it also in a way helping India and the UK reposition their ties in a much larger global context, especially enabling joint ventures in countries that belong to the Commonwealth, in countries that fall in the Indo-Pacific region, and we see a renewed interest from UK, particularly now in this region. So do you see this adding momentum not just in terms of our bilateral ties, but also in our collaboration in other countries?
Sure. In fact, two areas, as Ambassador mentioned, this will give momentum to our defense and security ties. And all other things which are actually listed in the last year's agreement, the Technology Security Initiative. Whether you look at artificial intelligence, quantum, all the new materials, specific materials, rare materials, all the thing because there is a lot of research which happens in the British institutions and British universities. And our institutions have reasonably good linkages. As the Ambassador said, in the health sector, we have seen those linkages can really be very, very useful. The same can also happen in the artificial intelligence. Because, we must not forget that after United States and China, the third biggest, perhaps the country which we have artificial intelligence research going on is also the UK. So our companies and our research institutes would be benefit if we get into some of those collaborations in some of those areas. And of course, in third countries, those areas are already, many of these things are already part of our roadmap, 2030, which has already been agreed between India and the UK. So we are anyway working together, particularly as I mentioned in the development sector. In some of the countries in Africa, and Indo-Pacific has been added again. We can work in the connectivity sector, we can work in other areas. So in the last 10-15 years, there is this, I think the relationship has definitely become much more stronger. There is a confidence, and this particular visit of the Prime Minister and also the signing of FTA would obviously be much more useful for our relationship, and this is going to really strengthen our relationship and take it further.
Absolutely, and especially looking at how our relations with the United Kingdom have evolved, as we've discussed with both our guests on the program, it's clear that both sides are not just keen, but they're making significant efforts to build a relationship that's not just forward-looking, but mutually beneficial. FTA is a clear example of that. But this visit of the Prime Minister to the country will definitely accelerate the momentum in the efforts that have been made by both sides in recent years. Time allows me to take up only that much on the program today. Thank you once again, Professor Sachdeva, Ambassador Tripathi, for joining us on the program with your thoughts and perspective. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well.
To watch more programs of Sansad TV, subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and share them.